Welcome. I would like to welcome you to episode 430 of the Unpopular podcast. This is the man, the myth, the legend, Jalen Hunter. Here at the Unpopular podcast, I'm not really asked to agree with me. I'm here to ask you to hear me out. What I love to say on this podcast, especially when we're in the playoffs, when we're in a new series, is you don't want to take a lot away from game one. I've said this almost every single time, and honestly, it's the truth. Game one is just game one. We've seen people lose game ones that ultimately win the series. We've seen game ones look completely different from the rest of the games in the series. So game one is not the game where you want to have your final takes, or you want to start changing your take. You want to start casting aspersions about the entire series because it's just game one. That's usually what is said. And in this case, obviously we're talking about game one of the NBA Finals, the Boston Celtics against the Dallas Mavericks. In this case, it is true. Sort of. In this case, you don't want to take a lot away from game one. For people that didn't watch game one, the Boston Celtics beat the Dallas Mavericks 107-89. Complete destroy. And again, I'm not going to cast a complete aspersion about this finals from game one. I am fully aware of the fact that game one doesn't dictate anything. But there are some things about game one that I'll say this. There's things that we saw in game one that should have alarming concerns for Dallas. The reason why I picked Boston in 6, even though I'm not a fan of Boston, it kind of feels like the whole NBA is rooting against Boston. But the reason why I picked Boston in 6 because I thought they were a better team. When you look down their roster compared to the one of Dallas, they just have a deeper roster. They have a better roster. While I think that Dallas has 2 of the 3 best players in the series, I just think the entire team is better when we talk about the Boston Celtics. And when we're in a series, while yes, the rotations shrink and players get more minutes than others, obviously, because you want your best players on the floor at all times, I just felt when Boston plays at their best and Dallas plays at their best, Boston just looks different. And game one of the NBA Finals showed me a lot. And I'm not going to bury Dallas. Obviously, they lost. Obviously, I have Boston in 6. But I'm not going to completely throw away Dallas after game one, even though they did essentially get destroyed. But the reason why I would be concerned if I'm a Dallas fan, if I'm part of the Dallas team, is how they lost. When you go into a series, when you're playing anybody, you have a game plan. You have a playbook. You have schematics on how you can fare best against an opponent. Now, obviously, there's things that you do as a player, as a team, that makes you formidable against anyone. So you don't really change the way that you play, but you change how you attack every team, because every team is different. Going into game one, what do you think? Because obviously we don't know, but what do you think the game plan was that Dallas had against Boston? Let me tell you what I think it should have been. We know Boston to be a prolific three-point shooting team. In fact, I think the broadcasters said that 49, I believe, 48 or 49% of their offense is a three-point shot. meaning almost half of their points, half of their field goal attempts are 3-point shots, meaning you have to guard the three with your life. A team that isn't good at shooting threes don't take 48, 49% of their shots behind the arc, meaning they are a prolific 3-point shooting team. And as we've seen on numerous occasions, not just this year, but in the playoffs, Boston, when they're hitting their threes, they are virtually unstoppable. They're already a really good defensive team, but you add 3-point shooting, it's almost impossible. So going in, you're going to want to guard the three. You're going to have to stop the 3-point barrage, or it's going to be a long day for you. You're probably going in thinking, okay, if we stop the three, that helps them. Also, let's slow down their best players. We can't allow Jason Tatum to go off. We can't allow Jaylen Brown to go off. Anyone else can kill us, just not Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. That thought process is, if your best players are going off, it's like a trickle down effect. If you're or a ripple effect. If you as your best player, if you're going off, if you have confidence, if you're making shots, that gives other people around you the confidence. So you start seeing crazy stuff that other people are making. It's just like, all right, let's cut the head off the snake. Let's stop Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And the biggest question mark going into the finals was Kristaps Porzingis. He missed most, if not all, of the playoffs with a hamstring injury or a calf injury. We don't know what he's going to do. We know that he could be an X factor in this series, but we also don't know how good he's going to be. So we're not going to worry about him. He's going to have to show us. That is probably, in my opinion, the smartest way to attack the Boston Celtics going into the game. I would assume that the scouting report for Dallas had some of that verbiage. Again, I'm going to reiterate. We shouldn't take a lot. We shouldn't have a final thought of a series off of game one. But here is why I think this game one was different. Here is why I think that I'm more confident now with the Celtics than I am with Dallas. And I think that Dallas there should be some cause for concern. Let's first start with Porzingis, because I think Porzingis for sure was the MVP of the game one. Nobody in their mama should have expected Porzingis to play as well as he did. Again, that was the reason why a lot of people picked Dallas to win. That's the reason when you heard a lot of analysts, when you heard, a lot of people talk about how important Porzingis is to this Boston Celtics team, the reason why a lot of analysts picked Dallas was because Porzingis hasn't played. And when you're playing a team that can run you out the gym like the Dallas Mavericks can, the last thing you want to do is test a calf that you haven't played in the playoffs pretty much is in the finals against the Dallas Mavericks. Well, boy. Kristaps Porzingis in 21 minutes looked like the best player on on Boston Celtics. He came in and he did not look like he missed a beat. He went 8 for 13, 2 for 4 from 3. He had 20 points. And how many blocks did he had? He had 3 blocks. That was the missing piece that Boston hasn't had this entire series. They haven't really had a rim protector. Al Horford is okay on defense, but he's getting older and he's not the tallest. Well, when you have a 7'3" player that can also extend his offensive game out past the three-point line and is a really good rim protector, that just opens up your offense and your defense to a whole nother realm. That's why I said, Porzingis is the key. Yes, Jaylen Brown is a great player. Yes, Jason Tatum is the best player on Boston. But Porzingis is the main key in Boston's ceiling. And he came out, even though he did come off the bench, he came out like he has not missed a beat. I think it was extremely smart for them to start Al Horford, because you don't want to start Porzingis in a finals and you haven't played. So I do think it was smart that they didn't start him. But Porzingis looked like the best for a good stretch of that game. He looked like the best player on Boston. So if Boston is going to get that Porzingis the entire series, I know I originally said that is going to be Boston in 6. It's going to be tough for me to envision Dallas winning a game, let alone 2, if this is the Porzingis that they're going to get alongside the other players. We've seen this before. I remember Steph Curry, he missed a good chunk of time. And he came back in the playoffs against, I think it was the Blazers, when they had Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. He came back against the Blazers, and I think he had 40 that first game. Now, obviously, Porzingis didn't have 40, but I think he had 40 points. And then the next few games, he struggled. So it could have just been adrenaline. It could have been just the defensive approach wasn't there. I don't know. But what I will say is, if this is the Porzingis that Boston is going to get, and I think the scary part and why I don't think it's like an anomaly, is this is how Porzingis has played when he has played with Boston this entire season. So it's not like this is a new, this is a new Porzingis that we haven't seen. We've seen him like this. That's why a lot of people, including myself, are saying that he's the key to this NBA Finals as far as Boston winning a championship. So that's one. 2, I said, if you're going to go against a Boston team, you have to cut off their well. You have to cut off the 3-point line. Again, the stat is, I think 48 or 49% of their offense comes behind the 3-point line. Boston made 16 threes compared to Dallas making 7. You're already struggling, man. You're already struggling. You're already the underdog in this series, in my opinion. The last thing you want to do is allow Boston to get into their rhythm. And if you watch that game, another reason why I would be concerned is the defensive pressure that Dallas was unable to put on Boston. It just seemed like their guards, whether it was Jaylen Brown, whether it was Drew Holiday, whether it was Derek White, and Jason Tatum, even though he's not a guard. Jason Tatum is part of this too. They just kept getting beat. And for people that don't understand why that is such a killer, when you're playing and your top guard gets beat, and when I don't mean top guard as best player, I mean the guard who is guarding the ball handler at the top. When he gets beat, that puts such a strain on the rest of your defense, because now your defense turns into help mode defense. It's not, you have to help the person that's getting beat. So that's why you saw a bunch, and I mean there's a reason why Boston shot 42 threes. And out of those 42 threes, I'm almost sure that maybe 30 of them were wide open because Dallas's guards kept getting beat. So now you have to close in, you have to protect the paint. And every single time that Dallas's defense collapsed, Boston kicked it out to a wide open 3-point shooter. As much as Dallas got killed on the 3-point line, Boston did not shoot too well from 3. Even though they did hit 16, it was 38%. They didn't shoot the best. You cannot continue to get beat at the guard position. Like beat as easily as, Kyrie, Luka, as they were Derrick Jones was getting beat, because that put such a strain on a back line that already is undersized. Which is why you saw how many fouls? Which is why you saw Derek Lively have 5 fouls and Daniel Gafford. Oh, he didn't have a foul. Oh, PJ Washington had 3 fouls. Almost PJ Washington had 3 and Derek Lively had 5. So most of those 8 fouls came at the rim. And lastly, well, not lastly, but another thing. We talked about cutting the head off the snake. We talked about if you're going to beat Boston, you have to contain Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And for the most part, they did that. Jason Tatum went 6 for 16. He had 16 points, 11 rebounds. Jaylen Brown had 22 points and 6 rebounds. Those are good numbers, don't get me wrong, but those aren't superstar numbers. And while Porzingis for a good portion of the game looked like the best player on Boston in game 1 was Jaylen Brown. The way that he was attacking, the way that he was able to get to the line. I mean, he took 11 free throws. The way that he was hitting he went 2 for 6 from 3. Like he had a great game. 22 points. And that is why I think Boston, that's probably the main reason why I picked Boston to win this series. Boston is, how do I say? I'll say it like this. Kyrie Irving struggled mightily in game 1. Kyrie, he went 6 for 19, 0 for 5 from 3. And most of those 5 threes were wide open. But 0 for 5 from 3, he had 12 points. Luka, on the other hand, had 30 points. He went 12 for 16, but he had 30 points and 10 rebounds. I said this before going into the game. One of the reasons why I picked Boston was because Dallas has to have good games from their 2 stars. If Luka is having a great game and Kyrie is not, that puts them at a disadvantage. If Kyrie is having a good game and Luka is not, that puts them at a disadvantage. They both have to be great in order for Dallas to win. Because as good as PJ Washington has been, as good as Derrick Jones has been, as good as Derek Lively has been, Daniel Gafford, they cannot carry the load for their 2 stars. They're not good enough, and no offense to them, it's just true. They're not good enough to carry the load, at least offensively, if a Kyrie Irving is not playing well, if a Luka is not playing well. And as we saw, Kyrie Irving has a bad game, they get destroyed. And Kyrie Irving had those 6 field goals, some of them were magical. But he also took 19 of them and missed 13 of them. Boston does not have that issue. We've seen games where Jason Tatum has been terrible. We've seen games where Jaylen Brown has been terrible. And you have Drew Holiday pick up the slack. You have Porzingis pick up the slack. You have Derek White pick up the slack. Hell, I never thought I'd say this, but even Al Horford offensively has picked up the slack if Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown is not playing well. In order for Dallas to win this series, they're going to have a Herculean effort, not only from their two stars, but they're going to have to stop more than two people. They're going to have to everyone is going to have to play their part defensively. If one or two players don't, it's like an avalanche effect, and that's what we saw. If the guards keep getting beat, if you keep getting beat, if you're one-on-one matchup, you keep getting beat, which draws somebody else to have to collapse, and then they kick out for a wide open three. Whoever is getting that wide open three is a solid three-point shooter, whether that's Jason Tatum, whether that's Al Horford, whether that's Drew Holiday, whether that's Porzingis, whether that's Derek White, whether that's Jaylen Brown, whether that's Sam Hauser, whether that's Luke Kennard, you, Peyton Pritchard, you are going to lose. The only reason why I say that game one isn't the end-all be-all, but it should be a cause of concern, is because every single way I thought that Boston could beat Dallas in this series, they beat them in game one. Every single way. Nothing outside of Porzingis playing as well as he did, nothing was shocking to me about. The only thing that was shocking to me about game one is that everything that I thought could happen did happen, and Dallas was unable to stop any of it. Trust me, I know they took 42 threes, 30 of them were wide open, and they missed a bunch of them. This score could have been much worse. Now, obviously, again, it's just game one. And I don't expect Kyrie to play as bad as he did. Luka, he didn't play bad, but he did have 1 assist. In fact, as a team, they had 9 assists as a team compared to 23 assists for the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics had 9 blocks, and Dallas had 1. Damn, Boston had more blocks than Dallas had assists, steals, and blocks. And while, yes, Dallas beat Boston in the turnover battle by 1, when you're losing in every other battle, like, you know. Again, the only way I can see Dallas winning is if both of their stars are firing on all cylinders, and somehow this team that hasn't been great all year defensively, they did have, you know, the last few weeks of the season in the playoffs, they've been solid, but they are one of the worst, I will say. They're one of the worst three-point defensive teams. Like, defending the three, they're one of the worst. And they're playing against the best three-point shooting team in the league. So the only way I see them winning is if Kyrie and Luka go off and have the games that they're capable of having, and this team play defense and defend the three. Because game one got ugly quick. I think the score was like 8-8, or like maybe Dallas had like a 10-8 lead, I think. And then it just went downhill from there. And they were up. I will say this, and this is, I guess, a positive. Boston was up like 30. They were up 29 points. And Dallas cut it all the way to 8. But something that should be a cause for concern, as soon as Luka Doncic went to the bench, it went left quick. As much as I'm not rooting for Boston, and I've been very open about that, it's very hard for me. Take game one out of it. It's very hard for me to see a roadmap where Dallas is going to beat Boston 4 times in a series. This Boston team has only lost 18 games all season. I don't see where 4 more is going to come in, but hey, I would be happy to be wrong, but we'll see. Speaking of we'll see, there's been a story that has been going pretty much congruent to the NBA Finals, and that is the LA Lakers coaching search. And a name that was thrown in the ring, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, by Woj was Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley, who was the coach of the UConn Huskies, apparently has been in the Lakers have been in serious talks with Dan Hurley to get him to be the next coach of the Lakers. And obviously, when we heard the news, it was a big shock. It was a big shock because the name that we've heard for the last few weeks now, and it seemed like that name was catching steam, and it kind of felt like it was a done deal, was JJ Redick. Whether that was, we heard stuff from JJ Redick in LeBron James' podcast. We've heard Shams talking about it. We've heard report after report saying that JJ Redick is the front runner, and they're blown away by their interview with JJ Redick. We, as consumers, as fans, as outlookers, thought JJ Redick was pretty much going to be it, and the only person that we were hearing. So when we hear 2 days ago that Dan Hurley is now in the lead, in the driver's seat as far as the name that the Lakers want, it kind of threw us off, And I have a couple thoughts, man. Dan Hurley, in all respective purposes, is the best head coach in college basketball right now. I'm not saying the greatest all time. At least in men's college basketball, because you can also throw Don Staley in there. You can throw Gino Auriemma. For men's college basketball, Dan Hurley is probably the best coach still coaching. And yes, that's no disrespect to Bill Self. There's no disrespect to anybody. But you're coming off of back-to-back national championships. First time that's happened since the Florida Gators. And you're pretty much turning UConn, at least UConn's men, back into a powerhouse. They were obviously good. They've had multiple national championships. I mean, you have Jeremy Lamb, you have Shabazz Napier, you have Kemba Walker, you have Rip Hamilton, Charlie Villanueva, Ben Gordon. It's had a rich history of players, and it's had a rich history of winning, but it's been a good number of years before Dan got there that UConn men's was really looked at as a powerhouse. They went through some ugly years. So in all respective purposes, Dan Hurley has not only turned around this franchise back to where it would like to be, but he is the best college basketball coach. And I was also shocked to hear Dan Hurley's name because I think a year or two ago, he signed an extension to remain the head coach for UConn. So he has a deal that is freshly inked, and now you're hearing that he is a front runner for the Lakers job. This is going to sound crazy. When I wrote it down, I read it crazy, when I said it to myself, it sounded crazy. When I was getting ready to, when I was building this show, building this episode, it sounded crazy. But the UConn, in my opinion, the UConn Huskies job is better than the LA Lakers job right now. Now, if we're talking about money, then obviously the Lakers job is more appealing than the UConn Huskies job. NBA is able to pay their coaches much more than college, obvious reasons. And it's the LA Lakers. So, if we're just talking about money, then yes, the Lakers is more appealing than UConn. But I think that's where it stops as far as factors that are more appealing for the Lakers than UConn. Dan Hurley is a legend at this point in college basketball. His name is more synonymous with greatness in college basketball now than it would be anywhere else. Again, he has done something, and his UConn teams have done something that we have not seen in decades. And I understand that we're in a weird spot in college sports. With NIL deals and now the deal that schools are able to pay their players and the excessive use of the transfer portal, and there isn't really much, how do I say this? It's very hard to keep kids these days because now most athletes, most of the kids that are going into these schools want instant success. And on top of that, they want their instant success tied with money. So now you have people that's able to give more NIL. It's just a weird time in college sports, which is why you're seeing a lot of greats leave. Coach K left. Roy Williams left. On the football side, Nick Saban left. It's just a weird time. Hell, he didn't leave, but you even see Coach John Calipari. He went from Kentucky to now Arkansas. And he stated that Kentucky just needs a new voice to hear because they've drowned my voice out. So I know it's a weird time. And I understand that the thought, and not just the thought, but what has been in the future, in the past, I'll say. What has been in the past is if you want a more secure job and the NBA is calling, you go to the NBA. Because the thing about colleges is there's expectations for a lot of these colleges that there shouldn't be. We've talked about that a ton on this podcast. There's a lot of colleges that have expectations that they shouldn't have. Just their name alone gets them those type of expectations, but they shouldn't have them. So historically, it's been if you get an NBA job, you run to it. Now, most of the time, a lot of these college coaches have not seen success or recent success as soon as they move. Like John Calipari, he didn't see recent success. I think the most successful coach, at least in the first 2 to 3 years of them moving from college to NBA, was Brad Stevens when he went from Butler to the Celtics. But usually it doesn't work. Not even in the NFL. Nick Saban tried, didn't work. But a lot of the times there's sort of like Fred Hoiberg. There's more. You kind of have, because there's more money involved, you kind of have a shorter rope in some instances. or a longer rope, I'm sorry, in some instances in the NBA than you do in college. That is where things kind of differ when we talk about the Lakers. I'll say it since nobody else wants to say it. The only appealing thing about the Lakers job is you will be coaching LeBron James and Anthony Davis. That's it. And to be completely honest, I don't know. You're not going to be coaching LeBron James and Anthony Davis for long. And on top of knowing that, you still have the expectation to win now because you're going to the LA Lakers. It ain't like you're going to the Detroit Pistons. It's not like you're going to the Washington Wizards. You're going to the Lakers, the marquee franchise pretty much of the NBA. They've had losing season after losing season, and they're still one of the most profitable teams in sports. So, it shouldn't be a surprise that you'll be going in with the expectation to win now, but your team is nowhere close to win now. The only thing that you have to win now is LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Which means there's going to be unfair criticism, there's going to be unfair expectations, and you don't have any of that at UConn. In fact, that's one of the biggest positives to Dan Hurley. Nobody expected UConn to be as great as it was when he was the coach, or when he became the coach. As we speak, he is 141 and 58 as their head coach. As the head coach of UConn, he has 2 national championships back-to-back, 2 regional Final Fours, obviously. He has an A10 championship, A10 regular season champions, Big East regular season champions, and Big East tournament champion. Oh, and he was the coach of the year last year. As much outside of money, and don't get me wrong, I understand that money is a very important thing. I understand that at the end of the day, you need to be able to provide for your kids. You need to be able to provide for your family. You need to be able to provide for yourself. And it is very important. Money is very important to have. Don't get me wrong. So if it is just for money and the Lakers offer is much better than the UConn offer as far as money, which it probably is, and on top of that, years, but I think that's BS too. Because you've heard that when talking about this, you've heard that the Lakers are going to give him a long multi-year deal. And while that sounds like, okay, well, that means that they're going to give him, they're going to trust him to change the organization, and they're going to give him multiple time. That's BS. Because if you look, you can fire. Hell, look at the Milwaukee Bucks. They're paying 3 coaches right now. They'll fire you in a heartbeat if they don't feel like, whether you have a 10-year deal, whether you have a 2-year deal, whether you have a 15-year deal, they will fire you whenever they want to fire you. And I don't care how long that deal is. If the fans start voicing their frustration, if media starts covering your team heavily because you're not reaching expectations that your team probably doesn't warrant, then trust and believe that 10-year deal don't matter at all when they're saying, hey, bro, we're going to have to let you go. There's no question that Dan Hurley is a fantastic coach. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't work if Dan Hurley was the coach for the LA Lakers. But the track record shows that it's very unlikely for it to work. Because there's just a different way from talking to college students, talking to kids growing up, talking to teenagers, compared to talking to grown men, players that are making more than you, players that have more recognition than you. When we think of the UConn Huskies, the first thing we think about right now is Dan Hurley. When we think about the LA Lakers, the first thing and the last thing we think about is LeBron James, is the player. When we think about Golden State, the first thing we think about ain't Steve Kerr, it's Steph Curry. When we think about the Denver Nuggets, the first thing we think about is not Mike Malone, it's Nikola Jokic. When we think of the Milwaukee Bucks, the first thing we think of is not Doc Rivers, it's Giannis. And that is the same everywhere. So it's very hard having a college coaching style and college coaching approach to an NBA locker room. Because at this point, none of these players are looking for you for guidance as to how to get to the next level. They are set. Now, yes, they're looking for you to be smart in situations and guide them to a championship. But it's nah. Mm-mm. Like the same way that you yell, the same way that you try to coach an 18, 19-year-old ain't gonna work with four-time MVP, four-time NBA champion. That's not gonna work. Now, I'm not saying that Dan Hurley can't adjust. What I'm saying is, in the past, it has not worked. There's only a good handful of people that you can say it kind of worked. And most of them have losing records in their first few years. And I'm only saying their first few years is because when you get the Lakers job, you only have a maybe 1 to 2 year window of success, because LeBron James is going to be out of there soon. Again, he's about to be 40, if he's not already 40. He's about to be out of there soon. And then you have what? So, again, I think Dan Hurley is a fine coach. He is the best coach in college basketball right now. And I think the latest report is he's 50-50 on the job, whether 50-50 going back to UConn or going to the Lakers. All I'll say is, outside of the money, which is a huge part, everything, in my opinion, is leaning towards UConn as far as better destination than the Lakers. Now, maybe he's just tired of college basketball and wants something new. I don't know. Obviously, he's going to make the decision, and whatever one he makes, that's what he makes. And shouts out to him for that. But if it was me and I had to make a decision about what my future was going to be, if the money is close and if my family's comfortable and I'm comfortable in a sense, and what I'm doing is having a positive effect of where I'm at, and I'm winning national championships, and I am widely considered one of the greatest, at least, college basketball coaches right now, I wouldn't feel the need to leave. I'll just say that. So, we will see. Speaking of we'll see, I have not talked about the Stanley Cup playoffs, I don't think, once since it started. I don't think I've talked about it once. Now, in a very shocking turn of events, I have been keeping up with the Stanley Cup playoffs. Not because I've been working a lot of Stanley Cup events. And I have been paying attention. And the reason why I haven't talked about it much is because I'm not the most, even though I've been keeping up with it, I'm not the most knowledgeable in hockey. I'm trying to get more knowledgeable, don't get me wrong. And I'm not disrespecting hockey. I think hockey, there's always a question, right? The question is, what is the toughest position in sports? Some people would say quarterback. Some people will say a cornerback. Some people will say pitcher. I have always gone and said that the hardest position in hockey is a goalie, a NHL goalie. You having to stop a small ass puck from going past you 50, 60 times a game on skates in a crouch position majority of the time, almost all of the time. Yeah, that's tough. So I'm not here disrespecting the NHL. I'm just acknowledging the fact that I have not, before now, I have not known much about hockey, much about anything that's dealing with the NHL. But this year is a little different. This year, I have been paying attention. This year, I have been fully locked in. Now, yes, a lot of that is because of my job, but it doesn't matter how you're getting there, you know? So in the Stanley Cup Finals, we have the Edmonton Oilers going up against the Florida Panthers. This is the fifth consecutive year that a Florida team will be represented, or let me say this, Florida will be represented in the Stanley Cup Finals, whether if it was the Tampa Bay Lightning and now the Florida Panthers. And I will say that this is probably the least likely or the least predicted Stanley Cup we've seen. A lot of people thought Dallas was going to make it. Ooh, I know you didn't think I knew that. A lot of people thought Dallas was going to make it. And James Robertson was really good against the Edmonton Oilers in the Western Conference Finals, as well as Miro. Okay. If you've been paying attention to this podcast, you know that I'm not good with names. So no offense to anybody. I'm going to mess up a bunch of names. That's just who I am. I apologize. It's no disrespect. I'm trying to learn. Miro Hezekane. I know I messed your name up, bro. For the Dallas Stars. A lot of people had the Dallas Stars winning at least making it to the Stanley Cup Finals. A lot of people had the Rangers, even though the Rangers did win the President's Cup, and I think that's pretty much a curse. But Zabudajaj was really good. Vincent Torocek was pretty good. They just didn't. It's interesting, man. And obviously the Boston Bruins, yet another year where they had a really good year, but once you get to the playoffs, I mean, Brad Marchand was pretty good, but he didn't do much. At least against Edmonton Oilers. A lot of people had the Hurricanes winning, but they couldn't outlast the Rangers. Now, Carolina is a young team, and they should have a bright future, but I think the team that is I think there's going to be there possibly could be major changes is the New York Rangers, because I don't know how many times you can get close and it just you just don't get it. I mean, Zabudajaj is getting older. Torchek is getting older. I don't know. But we're here. And Baseball, I mean, not baseball. What in the world? Hockey is sort of like basketball, sort of, in a sense of in playoff games and big situations like the Stanley Cup Finals, you need your stars to play great. And that's kind of one of the biggest knocks on, let's say, Austin Matthews and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Toronto Maple Leafs every year have one of the best teams, and they haven't reached the heights, obviously, that they want to or that they feel they should, especially when you have one of the best players in hockey in Austin Matthews. And obviously it's more with basketball than hockey, but your best players have to come to play. And there has been a huge knock, not huge, but there's been a big knock on the Edmonton Oilers. And for years it's been, you have undoubtedly the best player in hockey. And that is Connor McDavid. Connor McDavid is the best player, hands down. There isn't really someone close. There are great players, but there's no one really close to Connor McDavid when he's playing well. In fact, the biggest knock on the Edmonton Oilers is you have two, in my opinion, top 5 players in the league, and that is Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Leon Draisaitl is... There are nights, I mean, even in the Dallas Stars, he had more points than Connor McDavid. He had 24 to McDavid's 21. There are multiple nights and multiple series this Stanley Cup run that Draisaitl has been the best player. So you can argue that the Edmonton Oilers have 2 of the 5 best players in hockey. And this is their first Stanley Cup appearance, I think, since 1993. And now you're going against a Florida team that, if you look at the entire team, I think Florida is a better team. And they also have a player that you can argue is a top 5 to top 10 player in Matthew Tkachuk. Now, Matthew Tkachuk hasn't had that breakout series. I think he has 19 total points in the playoffs compared to Connor McDavid's 31. But even in that, Connor McDavid hasn't really had, I think his breakout performance, if you want to call it that, was against the Dallas Stars. So the question is, who do I have winning the Stanley Cup final? I think the Panthers have gone through sort of a tougher route. You know, they beat the Lightning in the first round 4-1. They beat the Bruins 4-2, and they beat the Rangers 4-2. Compared to the Oilers route, they beat the Kings, they beat the Canucks, and they beat the Dallas Stars. And honestly, while the Canucks are good, the Kings are good, the only team that there were high expectations, in my opinion, going into the Stanley Cup playoffs was the Dallas Stars. While the Bruins had, I think, one of the best records in the regular season, and the Rangers, I believe, were the President's Cup winners. But it goes back to my basketball point. I think you have an advantage when you have the best player in the series. And on top of having the best player in the series, you have arguably 2 of the best 5 players in hockey playing. Again, Connor McDavid was kind of slow to the mound and kind of mound. What I'm saying is he was kind of slow. He hasn't really had a breakout series, even though he had his best series probably last round. And Matthew Tkachuk, he's pretty much struggled. He's had some big moments, but he's struggled majority of these playoffs. And one of the biggest knocks on Connor McDavid, as far as obviously there's still a generation of people that think that Connor McDavid is nowhere close to the great one, which is Wayne Gretzky. They think that he will never be close. They think that they shouldn't even be talked about in the same breath. I understand. It's very hard to consider yourself greatest of anything and you don't have at least the ultimate prize. I'll talk about James Harden towards the end of the show, but it's very hard to call yourself or to be considered amongst the greats when you have all the regular season accolades, when you're considered one of the best regular season players, but you just haven't hoisted that trophy. So while even winning a Stanley Cup, I don't think people will now say, hey, Connor McDavid is now better than Wayne Gretzky, but I do think that a Stanley Cup would make his push closer to Wayne Gretzky. And saying all that to say, the Edmonton Oilers have the two best players, in my opinion, in this series. They have Leon Draisaitl and they have Connor McDavid. And maybe it was the Dallas series, but I think that they possibly woke up. And when they're both on fire, when they're both hitting on all cylinders, it's almost impossible, at least this year, to beat them. And I have the Edmonton Oilers winning the Stanley Cup over the Florida Panthers, even though Matthew Tkachuk is really good and the Panthers have really good goalkeeping, even though they did give up 5 goals in Game 3 to the Rangers. I have the Edmonton Oilers beating the Florida Panthers. I just think Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are playing at an all-time, or they are still all-time players, and it seems like they played their best hockey last series, and hopefully that translates to the Stanley Cup Finals. So I have the Edmonton Oilers beating the Florida Panthers in, I'll say 6, 4-6. So those are my predictions. And we will see what happens then. Speaking of, we talked about the Great Eight. We've talked about the Lakers. We talked about the Celtics. I want to... What's a proper way of going to the next topic? What we're seeing, in my opinion, out in Oklahoma, is something that we will never see again. Just like, I think gone are the days. I think the last dynasty we've seen for a while in the NBA is the Golden State Warriors dynasty. Winning 4 championships in 8 seasons is incredibly difficult. Even though the Connecticut Sun look really good, I think they haven't lost a game yet. I don't know if we're going to see. It's very hard for me to think that we're going to see another team like the Aces. And the Aces could essentially win 3, which would be the first team since, I think, the Shocks to win 3 straight. It's very hard to have a dynasty because there's so many factors that can happen in a dynasty. There's so many things that can happen, whether that's players leave and players get hurt or other teams just get better. It's very tough. Especially, or let's say that toughness increases by 10 in college because you already have a small window for players. And the window gets even smaller when we talk about transfer portal, when we talk about going pro, when we talk about injuries, when we just talk about graduating players, senior year. It's tough. And what we're seeing out of Oklahoma, I don't think we will ever see again. What do I mean? The Oklahoma Sooners became the first team to win 4 consecutive titles in Women's College World Series history. And Patty Gasso, if I said your name wrong, ma'am, I apologize. She now is tied with the most national championships as a head coach in Division I softball history. I think she has 8. You have Gina Auriemma's UConn. You have Pat Summitt's Tennessee. You have the great UCLA teams. Hell, now you have this UConn team, UConn men's basketball. When we talk about, we can take that UConn team out. When we talk about dynasties, there is no way that you can look at, and we can look at what we're seeing out of Oklahoma softball and not continue to add their best players. That's another thing. Their best players change almost yearly. It's not like it's very hard to retain players. Now, obviously, basketball, football is all different. And softball, baseball, it's all different how, players are able to come in and out and, transfer portal. All of it's different for different sports. But in college, it is difficult to remain great. And the fact of they won their 4th consecutive, a 4-peat. To put that into perspective, I don't think there's ever been a 4-peat in maybe the Celtics. If there has been a 4-peat, it was old Celtics, the 1960 Celtics with Bill Russell. You don't really win. You don't see 4-peats. You damn near don't see 3-peats. We've only had the last 3-peat we saw was the Lakers and Shaq and Kobe. That doesn't happen. So I'm going to say shouts out to every single young lady that was on this championship team, every single young lady that was a part of all 4 World Series championships. Shouts out to Patty Gasso for being one of the greatest college coaches in history that doesn't get talked about a lot. Shouts out to you guys. And shouts out to the Oklahoma Sooners for completing their 4-peat. And what's funny is this was a down year. There was a stretch where they were on like a 56, 57 game win streak. This was a down year for Oklahoma. They came into the World Series as like they were the underdogs against Texas, I believe. And championship pedigree obviously overcame. And now they are champions. So shouts out again to the Oklahoma Sooners for completing their 4-peat. Let's move forward. And I said I was going to talk about James Harden in a second, and now we're here. Everyone has a legacy, whether it's a good legacy, whether it was an infamous legacy. Everyone has a legacy. Some more than others, some more recognized than others, some on a lower level. Everyone has a legacy. A legacy is, what are you remembered by? When they talk about your name, how are you going to be remembered? And usually the legacy talk comes up with older players because obviously they're more towards the end of their careers in the beginning. And a question on a podcast, I'm not too sure the name of the podcast, so shouts out to them. But a podcast, James Harden was on a podcast, and he was asked, how does he want to be remembered? And his answer was he wants to be remembered as a winner, as a teacher, and he's also said other things. But the glaring point of his answer was he wants to be known as a winner. And that set social media ablaze. That set media outlets ablaze, because the question is, how can you consider yourself a winner, but you've never won a championship? Hell, you never even won a national championship. Let me read off some of James Harden's accomplishments. He was an MVP. He was a 10-time All-Star, 6-time All-NBA first team. He was an All-NBA third team. He was a sixth man of the year. He was a 3-time scoring champ. He was a 2-time assist leader. He was All-Rookie second team. He's on the NBA 75th anniversary team. And he also won the Pac-10, Player of the Year. And his jersey is retired at Arizona State. Let me first say that I understand completely where a lot of people are coming from, saying that you can't call yourself a winner if you haven't won a championship. I get it. At the end of the day, when you play a sport, in my opinion, when you play an ultimate team game, when you play any competitive game, the goal, the objective is to win. You want to win. When you play basketball, your goal is to win a championship. Or at least your goal should be to win a championship. And a lot of players don't reach that goal. Only one team every year reaches that goal. Out of 30 teams, only one reached that goal. Some obviously more than others, but you know what I'm saying. When we talk about James Harden, there was a stretch, I think from like 2012 to like now, to like 2020. There was from the 2012 to like 2020. In my opinion, there was no argument who was the best shooting guard in the league. That was James Harden. James Harden, I just rattled off his accomplishments. There are players that play longer. There are players that played 10, 15, 20 years that can't come close to what James Harden has done. Not just accolade-wise, but James Harden, for a good stretch, was in the argument of best player in the league. For damn sure, the best shooting guard in the league. Now, I watched Stephen A. Smith's response, and I do agree to a sense of it's very hard calling yourself a winner in the same breath, in the same realm that people also consider you a quitter. Because whether we talk about how it ended in Houston, whether we talk about how it ended in Brooklyn, whether we talk about how it ended in Philly. He forced his way out of all three of those situations. And there is a shot that, I'm not going to say he forced his way out, but there's a shot that he forced his way to LA, and there's a shot that he may not even be in LA next year if they don't get a contract done. So it's very hard for people to understand and to rectify how his stints have ended his last few times and also consider him a winner because he was unable to, for lack of a better term, thug it out in these areas, in these organizations. And I get that. I do. And I also understand people's emphasis on the playoffs because even in that, there have been times in the playoffs where it looked like, I'm not going to accuse him, but it's looked like he's quit on his team, on his teammates. And he's had some game sevens that were he was absolutely horrible. He's had some games in playoffs where he was just absolutely horrible. I get that. So in that sense, I understand where people are saying, well, there's no way in heaven or hell you can consider yourself a winner. A, you never won a championship. B, you're actually considered a quitter. And C, when you needed to be a winner, when you needed to be the best player, when your skills needed to be on full display, because it is widely understood that you are one of the best players in basketball, you did not come to perform. So I understand that, crew. This isn't me planting my flag on one side or the other. This is me saying I understand both sides. I also understand the side to say, well, of course James Harden is a winner. There's players that's played longer that hasn't done half of what James Harden's done. James Harden has perfected a move. The step back was obviously there with James Harden, but he perfected how it was used. On top of drawing fouls. I know people hate it. But James Harden perfected how to manipulate his way to get to the foul line. That's James Harden. His imprint is forever in this game. Just like Steph Curry's imprint is forever in this game as far as shooting the ball, James Harden, as far as the step back, as far as finding ways to get to the free throw line, that's him. And I understand that when you look at all this, they're all regular season accolades, which I get. But even in the regular season, there are players that a lot of people would put over James Harden that haven't done half as much as this. Think about it like this. Robert Horry has 7 rings. Steve Kerr, I think as a player, has 5 rings, I think, as a player. Would you put them over James Harden? They've won championships, but they haven't done half of what he's done. But he also hasn't won a championship. So all I'm saying is, I understand both sides. I don't know if I'd call him a winner, but I will say that for me, James Harden legacy is there was a stretch, 8 to 10 year stretch where James Harden was undoubtedly the best shooting guard in the league. And James Harden will go down as one of the greatest offensive weapons the league has ever seen. I know that maybe it wasn't as popular, maybe it wasn't as great, or as fun to highlight. But a lot of what Luka does, James Harden was doing to another level. James Harden was getting 50 point triple doubles easily. That should show you all you need to know. Whether you want to call him a winner or not, that's on you. And honestly on him. Cool. I probably wouldn't say winner, but what I will say is his legacy is cemented as one of the greatest players we have ever seen. That essentially just didn't get it done in the playoffs. So, yeah. Speaking of playoffs, and last thing I'm going to say, and I do want to give my shout outs. I want to just say shout out to Doris Burke. Doris Burke became the first woman ever to cover a major championship in any male sport. I've tried to stay away from this recent tornado of topics with the WNBA and Caitlin Clark. I've tried to stay away from that. I know I talked about it before, but I've tried to stay away from that because to me, it's more, these topics have been more of an attack than actual acknowledgement of how great the WNBA has been this year and how great the WNBA is, even though a lot of people are just now finding out. I've kind of stayed away from that because it's easy to get lost in the negative talk, and it's easy for people's opinions and people's words to get skewed one way or the other. But I said all that to say that women have been doing a damn good job for as long as I can remember in the sports world. Whether we talk about the multiple women that are getting represented in the NFL now as coaches, whether we talk about some of the fantastic reporters that we have that are women, whether we talk about the women athletes. I mean, one of the greatest athletes of all time is a woman, and that is in Serena Williams and Simone Biles. Women have been trailblazing every single day of existence. Now, obviously, people don't want to recognize it, but that doesn't negate what's true. As much as people don't want to believe it, and as much as people want to shoot it down, the way that we look at sports today would not be the same if it wasn't for women. The way that women are able to approach the game, the way that women are able to see the game different than a male perspective, the way that there are some women that are able to break down games and analytics better than men. I think one of the best NFL analysts that we have ever had is Mina Kimes. The way that she's able to dissect the stats, the game, second to none. So I'm saying that women have been doing the damn thing for as long as I can remember. And as sad it is that it's taken this long, I am proud that I was able to witness the first woman to cover a major championship in any male sport. And I don't think that there has been any woman in the NBA history that deserves it more than Doris Burke. And I hear a lot of people talk crap about her, and I hear a lot of, she's, and any single time she's covering a game, she's a main topic, and there's a lot of people that don't like her. And I always combat it with saying, well, she does her job better than you ever would. I ever could. As someone that has goals and ambitions to be a sports analyst, she's someone I've always looked up to. And it was a proud moment for not just me, hopefully not just her, but for the NBA to have Doris Burke be the first woman to cover a major championship in any male sport. So shouts out to her. I hope that she is the first of many, many more to come. And I want people to respect the rise of women in sports because it's been bubbling for a while. Caitlin Clark isn't the first woman to discover sports. She's been great, don't get me wrong. But there has been so many great women. And this is a congratulations to you, Doris Burke. You are an inspiration. You should be an inspiration to every single NBA fan and every single person, male or woman, that has aspirations to cover a sport. Shouts out to you. Shouts out to you. And congratulations for continuing to make history. That is Doris Burke. And there you have it. That's been today's episode of the Unpopular Podcast. I truly, truly appreciate you guys. If you want an Unpopular Podcast shirt, hoodie, sweater, long sleeve joggers, the link is in the description below. I have multiple different colors, multiple different designs. Get your Unpopular Podcast merch today. Also, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm trying to reach as many subscribers as possible. I appreciate everyone that continues to support. It means so much to me. If you like the content, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to subscribe. It means so much. I appreciate everyone. If you get this far in the episode and you haven't subscribed, I don't know what to tell you, bro. So please subscribe. Also, I understand that there's some people that only watch me on YouTube and there's some people that only listen on DSPs. So if you are a DSP listener, whether that's Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Pandora, anywhere you get your DSPs, if you listen to the Unpopular Podcast and like what you're hearing, please subscribe, please follow. Again, it means so much to me that you guys tune in, that you guys listen, that you guys care about what the hell I talk about. So I appreciate you guys. Also, please follow the socials, whether that's Instagram, whether that's TikTok. I post pretty much daily there. A lot of the reels that you see on YouTube, they're a lot longer. You just have to cut them down to a minute to be considered a reel or a short on YouTube. If you want to see the longer version, the more extended version, go to the Instagram, go to TikTok. That's where you see the whole reel. Also, if you want to debate with me, if you want to go back and forth, tell me how much you love my take, tell me how much you hate my take. That social media is probably the place to do it. That's probably where we can go back and forth. You'll get to me the fastest. If you keep it respectful, I don't mind going back and forth. It just shows that you are passionate in whatever you're talking about and you watch my content. So it means a lot. So yeah, I don't mind going back and forth. Just follow and subscribe, and it means, to the socials. Until next time, much love.